Traveling to Europe can be incredible, but if it's your first time visiting the continent, it's full of little things that can surprisingly throw you off if you're not prepared for it. Today, I'm sharing some practical Europe travel tips that will help you avoid stress and unnecessary hiccups so you can enjoy your European adventures. Hey, I'm Kimberly, and this is KRod Collective, where I teach you how to travel solo, travel smart, and help you fall in love with Spain. Let's start with packing. Consider packing light, especially if you are going to be visiting more than one country during your travels. It's already a hassle enough to keep packing and unpacking and shifting things around in your suitcase multiple times throughout your travels. So the less you bring, the easier it's going to be. On top of that, you might be carrying that suitcase through different cities, cobblestone streets, narrow sidewalks, tight staircases, and maybe even up and down a few hills. I think one of the best ways to get around cities in Europe is by train, and if you are going to be taking the train, you need to be able to lift your bag by yourself. A smaller bag makes moving around so much easier. If you can't comfortably carry it around by yourself, then it might be too much. Piggybacking off of packing light, one thing that you might want to be aware of is that in some European cities, some of the buildings may not have elevators, and if they do, they might be older, smaller, and tighter. And also, some of the floors might be numbered differently. In places like Spain and Italy, the ground floor is usually considered floor 0, and then as you go up on the elevator, it's the first floor, then the second floor, than the third floor. Whereas in North America and in the US specifically, the ground floor is usually considered the first floor. And then as you go up, that's the second floor, third floor, fourth floor. But this is just something to be aware of. Speaking of small differences, one small thing that you might notice is that the bedding in a few European cities might be different if you're coming from North America, or more specifically, the US. They normally don't use a top sheet like you do here in the US. It's usually just the fitted sheet and a duvet, or the fitted sheet and a blanket. Question, Canadians, do you guys use top sheets? And in some places, if you book a room with a double bed, it doesn't mean that there will be two beds separated. They're usually two single beds or two twin beds pushed together. And I've also noticed that I think that in some cities, usually the beds are a little bit closer, lower to the ground than they are in the US. I know sometimes in the US, we are a big fan of these high beds. It's not a bad thing, and it won't alter your trip in any way. I'm just pointing it out as something for you to be aware of so that you're not thrown off guard when you get into your accommodation and that's what you see. Europe is a continent, not a country, so while it might be common to see Type C and Type F plugs and sockets, it varies by country, so you don't really want to show up without having the right travel adapter, because then you have to spend your time now roaming around the city trying to find the right adapter to charge your devices. Pack a universal travel adapter. It's an easy thing to throw into your bag, and it will ensure that you can plug in your devices no matter where you are. A lot of major European cities are walkable, and you are going to be walking a lot. If you already live in a walkable city, this is going to be a breeze for you, but if you don't forget to pack comfortable walking shoes. Every time I go to any city in Europe, I am racking 20,000 steps or more a day. So make sure to pack those comfortable walking shoes. You might be surprised at how much ground you can cover in one day. And another thing is some of these European cities are really hilly, and you're going to need something comfortable to get you up those hills. The first city that comes to mind that I can think of is Lisbon. Lisbon for me is so hilly, and you are going to be going up and down those hills all day. I personally try to bring at least one pair of good sneakers on any European trip, but you have to find whatever works for you and allows you to walk several miles, many steps with ease without getting blisters on your feet. Please prioritize comfort. I think one thing that a lot of people coming from North America, like myself, can be a little confused by is the Schengen zone. So the Schengen zone is a group of European countries that have border-free travel. This means that they can freely move between borders without passport checks. And this is going to be important to keep in mind during the planning phase of your trip. So for example, if you're planning a longer stay or a longer trip to Europe, and you are familiar with the Schengen zone, you will then know how long you can stay in certain areas and when you need to leave and explore outside of the Schengen zone. And that way you can build your itinerary for that longer trip using that knowledge. As I stated earlier, Europe is a big continent, and it is indeed a continent, not a country. So as you visit between countries, keep in mind that Europe is not a monolith. Spain is not Germany, Germany is not France, and France is not Italy. Each country has its own food, cultures, paces of life, languages, and even within those countries, there are also regional differences and sometimes even different languages. For example, the south of the US is very different to the Northeast, and the East Coast is different to the West Coast. Thinking about these differences ahead of time will help you adapt more quickly, avoid frustration, and also help you really enjoy each country and each city for what they are and what they have to offer and what makes them special and unique. Now, I know a lot of people want a Euro summer, and that's totally understandable. Summer in Europe always looks really glamorous online, but for me, it isn't always as glamorous as it looks because it is overcrowded, it's expensive, and it's really hot during that season. That said, if your goal is to have a true Euro summer, then go for it. I always say you have to do what's right for you. And if summer is the only time that you have to visit Europe, then please, by all means, go for it. But just be prepared. If you have a flexible schedule and you can avoid it, then I would recommend traveling to Europe during the shoulder season. Now, I will say, Europe does have some fun festivals and fun parties in the summer. That is true. That is definitely true. But it is so hot. It is just so unbearably hot for me. Personally, September to December and January to April are my personal favorite times to visit Europe. Plus, you get way better deals on hotels and flights during that time, and it's not as crowded. When you look at a map, European countries might seem small on the map, but city hopping every couple of days can really leave you exhausted and barely scratching the surface in any one place. Consider visiting one or two countries instead of trying to overstuff your itinerary and fit as many countries into one trip as you can. I would say it's pretty reasonable to stay at least 3 nights in one city. That way you can actually enjoy the local culture, the food, the daily life, instead of spreading yourself thin and having to pack up your stuff every other day just to hop on a train. Another thing that you can consider is taking it country by country. A lot of European countries have a ton of cities that you can explore. So for example, if you're visiting Italy, you can consider starting in Milan and then working your way down to Florence and then down to Rome or Naples, for example, rather than hopping from Italy to Greece to Spain and then to France. This is just something to consider. When you're planning your trip, think about your itinerary and the attractions that you want to see and the must-dos on your list. Since you'll most likely be walking a lot, staying close to your must-see places can save you a lot of time and a lot of energy. And this doesn't always mean that you'll be staying in the super touristy areas either. Something that I like to do is when I'm planning and researching for my trip, I like to go into Google Maps and star and map things. So then when I'm finished, I look at the clusters and I try to make sure I'm booking accommodation around the clusters of activities and things that I want to do and see for a little more convenience. In a lot of countries in Europe, slow living is fully embraced and it is a way of life. If you're from the US, like me, Sundays and holidays can look very different in Europe than they do here in the US. Shops, grocery stores, restaurants, and even some attractions might be closed on Sundays or have limited hours. Make sure you're aware of any local holidays that might be going on in the cities that you're visiting so you're not thrown off guard. While a lot of Europe can be dreamy, unique, and fun, let's not forget that it is old and you will need to manage your expectations. A lot of historic buildings and attractions that you might be going to see might be closed for renovation. They might have scaffolding all over the side. And on another note, central air conditioning isn't as common in some cities in Europe as it is in the US. Neither is central heating. If you live in a city like New York, then you're totally used to this, but it can be a bit of an adjustment, especially if you're spending all this money to have this trip and to have certain expectations or certain experiences or even have specific photos only to find out that things may not necessarily look the way that you thought that they were. So you have to learn to just pivot and also ground your expectations a little. Train travel is one of the best ways, and honestly my personal favorite way, to travel around different countries in Europe. The networks are extensive, comfortable, and reasonably priced. So if you're hopping between countries, definitely consider using the train. You can see the scenery change, and the best part about it is that most major train stations are already within the city center, so you don't have to worry about getting from the airport to the city center. Most of the time you're already there. You can usually walk off the train and connect to a metro or walk walk to wherever you need to get to pretty easily. There's also a variety of trains to choose from. There's regional trains, there's high-speed trains, so a little research goes a long way. This is also true for exploring and getting around one specific country. If you do need to fly for whatever reason, though, there are a few affordable budget airlines like Wizz Air, Ryanair, EasyJet, Welling, just to name a few. They do come with trade-offs though, and Europe is stricter with baggage policy than the US. So this is just something to keep in mind. So like I said before, try to pack as light as you can and make sure you know the specific luggage rules of that airline that you're flying with. Most European cities are walkable, so you will be walking a lot, but if you are short on time, public transportation can usually get you where you need to be with ease. They can also be a lot cheaper than ride shares and taxis. One of the best things you can do before your trip is to become a little bit familiar with the public transportation system in the city that you're visiting. Something else that I also like to do too is when I'm picking my accommodation, I try to make sure it's close to a bus stop or a metro station. It can also save you a ton of money as well. If you're loving this video so far and you're finding it helpful, definitely make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more travel tips. If you're not an EU resident and you did a lot of shopping while you were in Europe, you might be eligible to claim back the VAT that you paid when you leave. So VAT stands for value added tax, and it's a sales tax that is built into the price of goods and services in Europe. So in a lot of cities, when you go to the store, the price that you see is the price that you're going to pay because the tax has already been included. Whereas in the US, for example, the tax is usually added after. So then you might see a price for an item, so say $10, but then when you get to the register, it might be $12 because tax has been added at the register. And VAT is usually between 15 and 25% depending on the country. So when you're leaving a European country, you can get something called a VAT refund. Usually you have to meet a minimum purchase amount and shop at stores that participate in the refund program. You'll also need to keep your receipts and show them to the custom authorities at the airport. But this can be good to keep in mind, especially if you are traveling specifically to Europe to shop. The next Europe travel tip is that using credit cards and debit cards is really easy. Europe tends to be ahead of the curve when it comes to using cards in comparison to the US. So for example, the chip system came to Europe way earlier than it did in the US. Europe had tap to pay for years before we had tap to pay. Also, you're seeing a lot more now in the US that when you go to a restaurant, sometimes the server will bring the credit card machine to your table, but Europe has been doing this for years. So paying by card is very common in a lot of establishments, and oftentimes it's preferred. However, do keep in mind that American Express and Discover are not as widely accepted. So if you do use primarily an Amex or Discover, you might want to start thinking about some alternative cards that you can bring with you for your trip. When you are paying by card, you will most likely be asked if you want to pay in the local currency or in your home currency. And you're going to want to choose the local currency. When you pick your home currency, you're usually getting a much worse conversion rate than you are if you're picking the local currency. So when you're running around Europe trying to enjoy things and see all of the attractions, you are bound to get hungry. Try to avoid eating directly near major attractions. These restaurants usually inflate their prices, and typically their food is not very good. You can usually spot them because they usually have these big posters of the menu outside the restaurant in English and in a lot of other different languages, and oftentimes they'll try to lure you in by speaking to you in English. These restaurants target tourists, and most of the time if you walk down a couple of streets or even walk on the perpendicular street, you'll usually find a better restaurant with better food and better prices. Now, while you're at the restaurant, they may bring you a bottle of water and a little bread basket, and it may not be free. Now, this does depend on the city, the country, and the restaurant, but this is pretty common in Europe. Something that you might want to do is a little bit of light research into the tipping culture of the country or city that you're visiting. This can be a difficult one for us coming from North America because tipping is just so deeply ingrained in our culture. But remember that most service industries in Europe, the employees are paid on salary and not on tips. But tips and tipping practices do vary by country. Depending on the time of year and the season that you're traveling, some major attractions in some European cities might have long lines and long wait times. This can take a lot of fun out of the experience and cut into your time on your trip. I recommend considering skip-the-line tickets and guided tours. Yes, it does cost more, but sometimes what you pay extra for, you're gaining back in cultural knowledge and experience and also time. And sometimes that's worth every penny. A lot of museums and attractions have free admission days or evenings once a month. It's a great way to see some of these amazing landmarks and attractions without spending a dime. The only catches are they can sometimes be a little more crowded than normal, or you might have to sign up in advance, but this is something that you'll have to research beforehand. If you're a student or a teacher or of a particular age, then you might want to consider and look into taking advantage of discounts. A lot of places in Europe, attractions, museums, things like that, have free or discounted admissions for students and teachers. You can look into something called the Etiquette card, which is the International Student Identity Card. It's recognized by national governments and by UNESCO. And you can get a lot of different discounts on attractions and accommodations. If you're a teacher or a professor, you might want to look into getting the International Teacher Identity Card. And this can also get you a lot of discounts on attractions and several travel-related things. If you qualify, then it might be worth getting. I'll leave some information down in the description box. If you have a long layover between trains or flights and you want to explore, you don't necessarily have to lug your luggage around with you while you do it. Many airports and train stations all around Europe have lockers that you can rent for the day or for a few hours while you go and explore the city. It's a small cost for the freedom that you'll have to explore that city without being weighed down by your luggage. Everyone wants to see the major cities in Europe, right? Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Prague, Copenhagen. If anyone understands this, I understand this. I have spoken many times on this channel about being a city girl and my love for big cities. But you can have just as memorable and meaningful experience in smaller cities and towns as well. These cities tend to be overlooked, but most of the time they're usually a lot less crowded, sometimes more laid back, less polished, and really have a lot to offer. These cities can give you a different perspective, and sometimes they end up even being a highlight of your trip. Taking the time to learn a few phrases in the local language of the city that you're going to can really go a long way, and not necessarily in the ways that you might be thinking. Obviously, if you don't speak the language and only know a few key words and can't really carry on a conversation, no one is really going to be expecting that from you. However, knowing a few words like hello, please, thank you can disarm people and open up the door to things like kindness and generosity. It also shows respect, and it's been my experience that people have been so kind to me when I make a little bit of effort to speak some of the language, even if I don't pronounce things perfectly. Of course, you might also have those moments where the other person really doesn't care, and that happens too, and that's okay. If you're traveling to Spain, and that's one of the countries on your European itinerary, and you want an easy and quick Spanish cheat sheet, then you can definitely have mine. You can check the description box below, and it's totally free. In many European countries, it is considered polite to greet people when you walk into a shop or a cafe or even an elevator. This can sometimes be a little challenging for anyone who is from the US who is not from the South, because our culture is definitely more individualistic. But a simple hello or even a gesture goes a long way towards creating a positive interaction. Also, if you're coming from the US, it's important to remember that customer service is different in comparison to the US. Like I said earlier, staff is usually paid by salary rather than by tips, and the approach is less rushed and usually a little bit less attentive. You may have to flag someone down or signal when you want to order, or even when you want to pay the check. They're not being rude, it's just a different system, and in a lot of cities, they're not going to rush you. Pickpocketing is a thing in a lot of European cities, especially tourist-heavy ones like Barcelona, Rome, and Paris. If you're on TikTok, then you've probably seen by now that viral TikTok of that woman from Texas grabbing that girl in Italy who pickpocketed her and holding her by her ponytail until the police showed up. Now, whether you agree with that or not, pickpocketing can happen in the blink of an eye, so you want to make sure that you're keeping track of your belongings. The best way to avoid getting pickpocketed is to wear a crossbody bag with the opening part of your bag closer to your chest, and try not to put any phones, tablets, electronic devices, cameras on top of the table while you're having a meal, especially if you you are dining outside. While pickpocketing is common in a lot of European cities, so are tourist scams. These are scams that target tourists, and they're designed to catch you off guard. For example, someone might rope you into a magic trick, someone might hand you a rose or some flowers and demand that you pay for them, especially on main streets and in busy squares. These may look harmless at first, but these are scams, and they are designed to pressure you into paying. Try not to engage, and if someone seems too pushy or something seems too good to be true on the street, it's best to just walk away. If one of the countries that you're visiting on your European adventure is Spain and you want to know what to expect before you visit, then definitely make sure you check out this video right here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.